My name is Maren Cole, and I am 29 years old. 3 weeks from now, I will stand in a courtroom and watch my father's face drain of color. I will watch my mother scream. I will watch two bailiffs tackle a man who once controlled an empire, pressing his designer suit into courthouse carpet while he shouts about knowing important people. But right now, in this moment I am about to describe, I know none of that. Right now, I am about to open an envelope that will change everything. The bailiff will read the list. Item 1, Item 2, routine numbers that make my parents' lawyer smile with satisfaction. Then Item 3. The judge will lean forward. His eyes will narrow. "Stop immediately," he will say, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "Get security in here. Now." My father will bolt from his chair, my mother will clutch her pearls and wail, and I will stand perfectly still, hands folded, heart calm, because I have been waiting 4 years for this moment. They thought they could silence me, they thought wrong, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started. 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning, that began like any other. The coffee was brewing when the doorbell rang. I remember that detail because I was standing at the kitchen counter watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether I had time to review case files before my 9 o'clock meeting. My apartment in Northeast Portland caught the morning light beautifully at that hour. I had chosen it for that reason, among others. The way the sun came through the windows and made the plants on the sill glow green. The way the space felt like mine, every corner earned, every piece of furniture chosen with intention. I had built this life with my own hands. No trust fund, no family connections, just 4 years of working harder than anyone expected and saving every dollar I could spare. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the door, some instinct already whispering that this was not a delivery, not a neighbor, not anything routine. The man on the other side wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He held a manila envelope like it contained something contagious. His eyes met mine, then slid away, settling somewhere around my collarbone. That was when I knew. He asked me to confirm my name, verify my address, sign on the line. His pen was heavy and expensive. The envelope passed from his hands to mine, and he turned and walked away without another word, like he wanted distance between himself and whatever I was about to read. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him disappear down the stairs. Then I closed the door, walked to my kitchen table, and opened the envelope with hands that were not quite steady. The header stopped my breath. In the matter of the conservatorship of Maren Elizabeth Cole, petitioners Victor Cole and Claudia Cole. My parents. My own parents were petitioning the court to declare me incompetent. I read the words 3 times before they assembled into meaning. Pattern of emotional instability, financial immaturity, and reckless decision-making. Unable to manage personal affairs without risk of significant harm. They wanted control of everything. My bank accounts, my apartment, my car, my decisions. They wanted to put their 33-year-old daughter, a senior forensic accountant who specialized in catching fraud, under their legal guardianship like a child who could not be trusted with her own lunch money. I kept reading, each line worse than the last. My career choice described as evidence of poor judgment. My estrangement from family framed as isolation requiring intervention. My financial independence twisted into proof that I was wasting resources without proper guidance. And then, near the bottom of the petition, a phrase that made my blood run cold. Respondent may possess materials that could endanger herself and others. They were not just trying to control me, they were trying to find something specific. I set the papers down and looked around my apartment. At the bookshelf I had assembled myself, filled with novels and professional journals. At the peace lily on the windowsill that I had nursed from a struggling seedling into something thriving. At the framed photo of myself at my master's graduation, alone, smiling, free. This was my life, every inch of it earned. and they thought they could take it because they had money and lawyers and a lifetime of practice making their cruelty look like concern. 4 years ago, I walked away from the Cole family. I was 25, fresh out of graduate school, interning at my father's company because he insisted it would teach me the real world. It taught me something, all right. It taught me that the man I called father would look me in the eye and tell me that some questions were not meant to be asked, that some doors were meant to stay closed. I had found discrepancies in the accounting records, payments that did not match invoices, material orders that did not align with what arrived on job sites. I brought my concerns to him privately, professionally, thinking he would want to know. He told me I was seeing problems that did not exist. He told me to focus on learning rather than investigating. And when I pushed, just once, his eyes went flat and cold, and he said, "Your time at this company is finished, Maren. Go find somewhere else to play detective." I left that night, packed a single suitcase, drove to a studio apartment I could barely afford, and started building a life that did not depend on their approval or their money. I took nothing from them except the clothes on my back and a hard drive I copied on my last night in the office. I did not know what was on it. I just knew they were hiding something, and some instinct told me to keep a record. That hard drive had sat in my safe for 4 years. I opened it once, 6 months ago, finally ready to face whatever truth it contained. What I found explained everything. It explained why my father wanted me gone. It explained why my questions made him so afraid. And now, holding this petition, it explained why they had finally made their move. They knew I had it. They knew I could destroy them. And they were trying to destroy me first. I set the petition down and stood up. The fear I had expected to feel did not come. Instead, something else rose in its place. Something cold and clear and sharp. I was not the scared girl who ran away 4 years ago. I was a woman who had built her own life from nothing. A woman who caught fraud for a living. A woman who had evidence they thought was buried. I walked to my bedroom, opened my laptop, and began searching for a very specific kind of lawyer, someone who specialized in fighting predatory conservatorships, someone who understood that family could be the most dangerous enemy of all. I found her name in article after article. Diane Mercer, the woman who dismantled power grabs for a living. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. The line rang twice before someone answered. I did not know it yet, but I had just fired the first shot in a war my parents thought they had already won. The receptionist put me on hold for 30 seconds before a voice came on the line. Calm, measured, professional. Diane Mercer speaking. I explained my situation in 3 sentences, trying to keep my voice steady. Conservatorship petition filed by parents. I am financially stable, professionally successful, mentally sound. And there is more to this story than they want anyone to know. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Diane spoke again. I have handled cases like this before. The wealthy do not file conservatorships out of love. They file them for control. She scheduled me for an in-person consultation the following morning. Bring everything, she said. Bank statements, tax returns, employment records, anything that proves your competence. Her voice dropped slightly. And, Maren, bring whatever it is they are really after. I froze. How did she know there was something else? In my experience, she continued, these petitions always have a hidden target. See you tomorrow. The line went dead, and I stood in my kitchen holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it should. I spent the rest of that day gathering documents, but my mind kept drifting backward. To understand why my parents did this, you need to understand who they are. The Cole family looked perfect from the outside. My father, Victor Cole, built Cole Construction from a small contracting company into one of the largest construction firms in the Pacific Northwest. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the kind of commanding presence that made people stand straighter when he entered a room. Business magazines called him a visionary. Community leaders called him a philanthropist. His employees called him Sir, never by his first name, and they said it with a fear they tried to disguise as respect. Victor Cole did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every word he spoke carried the weight of a man who had never been told no and could not imagine why anyone would start now. His love, if you could call it that, was transactional, loyalty purchased, not earned, affection measured in usefulness. He did not have children. He had investments. My mother, Claudia, was 58 and beautiful in the way that required constant maintenance. She had been born into a modest family and married her way up, and she never let anyone forget the distance she had climbed. Her role in the Cole household was clear. Victor made the decisions, and Claudia made them look elegant. She chaired charity committees, hosted galas, cultivated the right friendships. Her smile was always perfect, her outfits always appropriate, her opinions always calibrated to reflect well on the family. She was not cruel in the obvious ways my father could be. Her cruelty was softer, wrapped in concern, delivered with a sympathetic tilt of the head. "I am just worried about you, darling. You seem so lost." She made disappointment feel like love, and love feel like something you had to earn by being someone other than yourself. Our family home sat in Willow Heights, a gated community where every lawn was manicured, and every family had secrets they paid good money to keep hidden. 6 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a pool we rarely used, and walls that absorbed sound so efficiently that you could scream and no one outside would ever know. Then there was Sloane, my sister, 3 years younger, and everything I was supposed to be. Sloane had learned early how to play my parents' game. She mirrored their ambitions, echoed their opinions, laughed at their jokes, and was rewarded with their approval. She went to the college they chose, studied the major they suggested, and walked straight from graduation into a marketing position at Cole Construction, where she reported to our father and told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Sloane was not stupid. She was strategic. She understood that in our family, independence was rebellion, and rebellion was punished. So she made herself indispensable, the perfect daughter, the golden child. We shared a bedroom growing up, whispered secrets in the dark, built blanket forts, and dreamed about the future. That Sloane felt like a different person now, someone I used to know before our paths diverged so completely that we became strangers wearing the faces of sisters. The last real conversation we had was 4 years ago, the night I left. She stood in my childhood bedroom doorway, watching me pack. "You are making a mistake," she said. "They will never forgive you." I looked at her, at the carefully neutral expression she had learned to wear like armor, and said, "I am not asking for forgiveness." She did not call after I left, not once in 4 years. Until now, when she had something to gain by reaching out. The breaking point happened when I was 25. I had just finished my MBA and was interning at Cole Construction, assigned to the accounting department because my father thought it would bore me into switching to something more useful, like management. Instead, I excelled. Numbers made sense to me in a way people never quite did. Clean, logical, honest. Except the numbers at Cole Construction were not honest. I found discrepancies almost immediately. Invoices that did not match purchase orders, payments to vendors that did not appear in any database, project budgets inflated by 15 or 20% with no clear explanation. One project kept appearing in the irregularities, the Westfield Bridge renovation. I cross-referenced material orders with delivery receipts. The gaps were staggering. Grade 60 rebar ordered, but internal memos referenced grade 40 being delivered. Premium concrete specified in contracts, but standard mix noted in site reports. Someone was substituting cheaper materials and pocketing the difference. I brought my findings to my father, privately, professionally, thinking he would want to know. His face went still when I showed him the documents. His eyes, always cold, turned to ice. "You are seeing problems that do not exist," he said. "Some doors are meant to stay closed, Maren. Close this one." That was not advice. That was a command. The next morning, my office computer had been upgraded without my knowledge, and all the files I had been reviewing were gone. My access to the financial archives was revoked. HR called to inform me that my internship was ending early due to restructuring. That night I stayed late, used credentials that had not yet been deactivated, and copied everything I could find onto an external hard drive. I did not know exactly what I was taking. I just knew that whatever my father was hiding, I needed a record of it. I drove away the next morning and did not look back. 6 months later, a headline appeared in the Portland Tribune: Westfield Bridge Collapse. 3 construction workers dead. I remember reading it in my studio apartment, coffee going cold in my hands. The official investigation concluded it was unforeseen material fatigue. Coal construction was cleared of any negligence. Settlements were paid quietly, quickly, sealed. My father gave a statement expressing deep sympathy for the families, and I sat alone, knowing in my gut that those 3 men had died because of the discrepancies I had found, the questions I had asked, the door my father had slammed in my face. I never opened the hard drive. Not then. I was too scared, too uncertain, too focused on surviving my new life to confront the weight of what I might have carried with me. But 4 years later, 6 months before that petition arrived at my door, I finally found the courage. What I saw confirmed everything I had feared. Financial records showing systematic fraud, material substitutions across multiple projects, emails between my father and his CFO discussing how to keep the paper clean, and a direct connection to the Westfield Bridge, to the substandard materials, to the 3 men who fell to their deaths because someone decided their lives were worth less than profit margins. I closed the files and sat in silence for a long time. Now, holding the conservatorship petition, I understood. This was never about protecting me. This was about silencing me. They knew I had the evidence. They knew I could destroy everything my father had built. And they were trying to take control of my life before I could use it. I walked to my bedroom closet, knelt before the small safe hidden behind a false panel, and entered the combination. The door swung open. The hard drive sat there, black and ordinary, containing everything. Tonight, I would read through every file again. Tomorrow, I would meet Diane Mercer and tell her the truth. And whatever came after, I would face it standing up. They had 4 years to find me, to silence me, to make this go away. They waited too long. Now it was my turn. The safe opened with a soft click that sounded louder than it should in the silence of my bedroom. The hard drive sat where I had left it months ago, black plastic shell holding secrets that had cost 3 men their lives. I lifted it carefully, as if it might shatter, and carried it to my bed where my laptop waited. The evening light was fading outside my window, casting long shadows across the room. I connected the drive, watched the files populate across my screen, and felt my forensic accountant training take over. Whatever I was about to see, I would see it clearly. No more running. No more pretending I did not know. The folder structure was exactly as I remembered from my brief look 6 months ago. Projects organized by name and date, financial records, internal communications. Hundreds of documents I had copied in a panic 4 years ago without understanding what they contained. I clicked on the folder labeled Westfield Bridge Renovation and began to read. The invoice discrepancies were worse than I remembered. Pacific Steel Supply had billed coal construction for 400 tons of grade 60 rebar, the high-strength steel required for bridge load-bearing structures. Delivery receipts confirmed 400 tons received, but an internal memo from the site manager told a different story. Only 280 tons delivered, it read, remainder substituted with grade 40 per directive. Grade 40 was cheaper, weaker, never intended for the stresses a bridge would face. Someone had ordered the substitution, pocketed the difference, and documented it like it was routine business. I kept scrolling, my stomach tightening with each new file. The original contract with the Portland Department of Transportation specified premium concrete mix for all structural elements, but the internal version had a handwritten note scrawled in the margin. Use standard mix, pocket difference. The handwriting was familiar. I had seen it on birthday cards, on notes left on the kitchen counter, on documents I had filed as an intern. The initials at the bottom confirmed what I already knew. VC Victor Cole. My father had personally authorized cutting corners on a public bridge. The money trail was meticulous, which made sense. My father was nothing if not organized in his corruption. A spreadsheet tracked what he called cost savings across multiple projects. Westfield Bridge showed $847,000 in savings. But nowhere did the client billing reflect reduced costs. The difference had vanished into shell company payments, accounts that existed only on paper. I found emails between my father and Raymond Husk, the company CFO, discussing the arrangements. The subject line was simply, Westfield margins. Keep the paper clean, my father had written. Inspectors see what we show them. Raymond's response was 2 words. Understood. Documentation adjusted. The email was dated 3 months before the bridge collapsed. 3 months before 3 men fell to their deaths because the steel beneath their feet was not strong enough to hold them. I pushed back from my laptop, suddenly unable to breathe. This was not accounting error. This was not miscommunication or oversight. This was deliberate fraud, documented in my father's own words, with full knowledge of the risks. I forced myself to keep reading. A folder labeled Incident Response Confidential contained the internal engineering assessment, completed 2 days after the collapse. The conclusion was damning. Structural failure consistent with material underperformance. The recommendation was even worse. Conduct full material audit across all active projects. But someone had written across the page in red ink, the letters thick and angry. Bury this. The initials were the same. VC. Below the assessment, I found the incident report listing the 3 men who died. Miguel Delgado, 43 years old, structural welder, married with 2 children. Jerome Patterson, 38, safety inspector, single, supported his elderly mother. David Chen, 29, junior engineer, engaged to be married. They were on the bridge section when it gave way. They fell because the steel was not strong enough. They died because my father decided their lives were worth less than $847,000. The external investigation report told a different story, of course. Unforeseen material fatigue, it concluded, with no mention of substituted materials or ignored warnings. The investigating firm, I noticed, was a regular contractor for coal construction. The conflict of interest was obvious to anyone who cared to look. No one had cared to look. The settlement agreements made me sick. $50,000 to each family in exchange for their silence. Non-disclosure agreements that prohibited any public discussion of the accident, any legal action, any contact with media. The families had been pressured, isolated, given weeks to decide. Sign this or get nothing. Your husband is already gone. Your son is already gone. Do you really want to spend years in court, fighting a company with unlimited legal resources? They signed. Of course they signed. They were grieving and scared and alone. And my father's lawyers knew exactly how to exploit that. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to my own heartbeat. I had evidence of fraud, manslaughter, obstruction of justice. I had proof that my father was a murderer in everything but legal terminology. And I had a petition sitting on my kitchen table trying to take away my right to do anything about it. My phone buzzed, startling me, a new email notification. The sender was an encrypted address I did not recognize, a string of random characters. The subject line made my heart stop. You are not the only one who knows. I opened the message with trembling fingers. The text was brief and precise. I know what you have. I know what coal construction did to Westfield. They buried the truth. They buried the people who asked questions. I was one of those people. I survived. Barely. If you are planning to fight, you will need more than files. Meet me if you want the full picture. Public place. Your choice. It was signed simply, a former believer. I stared at the screen for a long time. Someone else knew. Someone who had been inside the company, who had asked questions, who had survived. The phrase buried the people who asked questions echoed in my mind. How many others had tried to expose this? How many had been silenced? I did not reply. Not yet. First, I needed to meet Diane Mercer. Then I would decide whether to trust this stranger. Her office was downtown, 10th floor of a modern building with glass walls and a view of the Willamette River. Everything about it was different from the wood-paneled, cigar-scented law firms my father frequented. Clean lines, efficient design, no pretense. Diane Mercer rose to greet me when I entered. She was in her early 50s, silver streaks in her dark hair, sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her handshake was firm, her expression neutral. She wore a simple black blazer, no jewelry except a practical watch. I liked her immediately. We sat at her conference table, and I presented everything I had brought: bank statements, credit reports, employment records, tax returns. She reviewed each document carefully, nodding at the obvious evidence of my competence. "On paper, their case is absurd," she said finally. "You are clearly capable of managing your own affairs, which means this is not about capability." She looked at me directly. "What are they really after?" I hesitated for only a moment. Then I placed the hard drive on her desk. I told her everything. The internship, the discrepancies, my father's warning, my departure, the files I copied, the collapse, the cover-up. She listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When I finished, she picked up the hard drive and turned it over in her hands, as if weighing its contents. "This is not just a conservatorship defense anymore," she said quietly. "This is evidence of criminal fraud and negligent homicide. If this goes public, your father faces prison. They know you have it. That is why they filed." I nodded. I had reached the same conclusion. Diane set the drive down and met my eyes. "You need to understand what you are holding. This makes you dangerous to very powerful people. They will not just fight you in court, they will fight dirty. Surveillance, intimidation, maybe worse." She paused. "Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Miguel Delgado, Jerome Patterson, David Chen. I thought of their families, silenced with $50,000 and a piece of paper. I thought of my father writing "bury this" in red ink. "I did not survive 4 years of silence to stay quiet now," I said. "We go to war." Diane nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in her eyes. "Then we need more than files. We need witnesses." I remembered the anonymous email still waiting for a response. I might know where to find one. The black sedan appeared on Tuesday morning. I noticed it as I left my apartment building, walking toward the parking garage across the street. It sat at the corner, engine running, windows tinted so dark I could not see inside. I had never seen it parked there before. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, someone waiting to pick up a friend. But something in my gut disagreed, and 4 years of living on guard had taught me to trust that instinct. I kept walking, kept my pace steady, did not look back. The parking garage was dim and cool, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls. I reached my Honda on level 2 and was unlocking the door when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow near the stairwell, there and then gone. I turned quickly, keys clutched in my fist, heart hammering. Nothing, just empty parking spaces and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But the feeling remained, pressing against my skin like humidity before a storm. Someone was watching me. I drove to work with my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror as much as the road ahead. The black sedan pulled out of its parking spot when I did, settling 3 cars behind me. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I took an unexpected turn onto a side street. The sedan continued straight, disappearing around the corner. Coincidence, I told myself again. But my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and Diane's warning echoed in my mind. Surveillance, intimidation, maybe worse. They knew I was preparing something. They were letting me know they were watching. The message was clear. Back off, or face consequences. I tightened my grip and kept driving. I had come too far to be frightened into silence now. At work, I struggled to focus. Cases blurred together on my screen, numbers refusing to resolve into meaning. My thoughts kept returning to the anonymous email. Meet me if you want the full picture. The sender could be an ally with crucial information, or a trap set by my father's people. There was only one way to find out. During my lunch break, I stepped outside and called Diane. I explained the situation, the email, the risk, the potential reward. She listened without interrupting. "Public place," she said finally. "Daylight. Tell someone where you are going. If this person is real, they could be the witness we need. If it is a trap, at least you will know how far they are willing to go." I thanked her and ended the call, then opened my email and typed a response before I could second-guess myself. "Tomorrow, 2 in the afternoon, Riverside Coffee on Hawthorne. I will be wearing a gray coat. Come alone. I will too." I hit send and watched the message disappear into the digital void. The reply came within minutes, just 4 words that made my pulse quicken. "I will find you." Whoever this person was, they had been waiting. Watching. Ready to meet the moment I reached out. That should have frightened me more than it did. Riverside Coffee was exactly the kind of place I needed. Busy, public, full of witnesses. Large windows let in afternoon light, and the constant hum of conversation provided cover for any discussion I might need to have. I arrived 15 minutes early, took a corner table with clear sightlines to both the entrance and the emergency exit, and ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking. The minutes crawled past. I watched every person who entered, measuring them against the faceless sender of that encrypted email. Young couples holding hands, students hunched over laptops, an elderly man reading a newspaper. None of them seemed to be looking for me. At 3 minutes past 2, the door opened and a man walked in. Late 40s, weathered face, graying stubble, a slight limp in his left leg. He scanned the room with the methodical precision of someone trained to assess threats quickly. His eyes found me, recognition flickering in them, and he walked toward my table without hesitation. He stood there for a moment, not sitting, studying my face like he was confirming something he already knew. Maren Cole. It was not a question. "And you are?" "Marcus Webb. I used to work for your father." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. "I was on Westfield Bridge the day it collapsed." He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. I noticed the scars immediately. Burn marks on his knuckles, surgical scars running up his forearms. His left leg was stiff beneath the table, a metal brace visible under his jeans. This was a man who had paid a physical price for something. His eyes were tired but sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and learned to stop expecting anyone to believe him. "You have files," he said quietly. "I saw you copy them 4 years ago." I stared at him, shock freezing the questions in my throat. He continued before I could speak. "I was working late that night. Security camera in the server room. I saw you downloading everything you could find onto an external drive. I erased the footage so no one else would know." The room seemed to tilt around me. He had known for 4 years. He had protected me without my knowledge, hidden my theft from the people who would have destroyed me for it. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. "Because I hoped someday you would use them." He leaned back, and I saw the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. "I have been waiting to see if you had the courage." Marcus told me his story in pieces, each fragment adding to a picture I had only glimpsed from the outside. He had been a senior structural engineer at Cole Construction for 15 years. Trusted employee, believed in the work, believed in the company. When he was assigned as lead engineer on the Westfield Bridge renovation, he thought it was recognition of his dedication. Then the materials started arriving. The deliveries did not match the specifications he had approved. Rebar grades were wrong. Concrete mixes were substandard. He reported his concerns to the project manager and was told to stay in his lane. He escalated to Raymond Husk, the CFO, and received the same dismissal wrapped in corporate politeness. He wrote a formal memo documenting every discrepancy, every risk, every potential failure point. The memo disappeared. That was when he understood. This was not oversight or miscommunication. This was policy. Cutting corners was how Cole Construction maintained its profit margins, and anyone who objected was removed. The day of the collapse, Marcus was on the bridge section inspecting welds. He felt the vibration first, a deep wrongness in the steel beneath his feet. He shouted a warning, started running. The section buckled, metal screaming, and he fell 20 feet onto scaffolding below. Broken leg, cracked ribs, burns from sparking cables. He woke up in the hospital 3 days later, and the first thing he saw was the news. Westfield Bridge collapse, 3 workers dead. The 3 men who died were his colleagues, his friends. Miguel Delgado, the best welder he had ever worked with. Jerome Patterson, the safety inspector who actually cared about safety. David Chen, the young engineer who was supposed to get married that summer. They were standing where Marcus had been standing moments before. 5 feet. That was the difference. 5 feet farther from the break point, and Marcus survived while they fell. He carried that distance like a wound that would never heal. While he was still recovering, Cole Construction sent visitors. HR representatives with forms and offers. Full severance, complete medical coverage, pension boost. All he had to do was sign an agreement never to discuss Westfield publicly. Marcus refused. 2 weeks after he returned to work, he was fired for performance issues. His medical coverage was terminated. His pension was contested in court, a battle he was still fighting. No engineering firm in the Pacific Northwest would hire him. "My father does not just silence people," Marcus said, his voice flat and hard. "He erases them." He told me about Miguel, the man who had noticed the steel was wrong and said so the night before he died. About Jerome, who filed 3 safety reports that month, all of which vanished. About David, the youngest on the team, who should have been planning his wedding instead of plummeting to his death. These were not just names in a report. They were men with families, futures, morning coffees, and evening dinners. They died because my father decided profit mattered more than their lives. And for 5 years, Marcus had been trying to make his survival mean something. "Alone, my evidence is not enough," he said. "They have had 5 years to build walls, but combined with what you have, the financial records, Victor's signatures, the emails, together we can tear those walls down." I looked at this broken man, scarred and limping and still fighting. He had protected me without knowing me. He had waited years for someone with the courage to stand up. "I have a lawyer," I said. "We are building a case." His eyes lit with something that might have been hope. "Then let me help, let me testify, let me say their names in a courtroom where my father cannot erase them." I reached across the table and shook his scarred hand. "Welcome to the war." Before we left, Marcus leaned close, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "They have been following me for 3 years. Cars, sometimes people on foot. If you saw a black sedan near your apartment, that is not coincidence. From now on, assume nothing is private. Assume everything you say and do is being watched." I thought of the sedan that morning, the shadow in the parking garage, the feeling of eyes on my skin. I nodded slowly. "I understand." We exchanged contact information using encrypted apps he recommended, then left separately, 5 minutes apart. I drove home the long way, watching my mirrors, taking random turns. No sedan appeared, but that meant nothing. They did not need to follow me every moment. They just needed me to know they could. My apartment building appeared ahead, ordinary and safe in the late afternoon light. I parked across the street and walked toward the entrance, keys in hand, mind still processing everything Marcus had told me. I climbed the stairs to my floor, rounded the corner to my door, and stopped. The door was ajar. Not by much, 2 inches, maybe less. But I always locked it. Always. I never forgot. I stood frozen, staring at the thin strip of darkness visible through the gap. Scratch marks surrounded the keyhole, fresh gouges in the metal plate. Someone had been inside. I pushed the door open slowly, using my elbow to avoid smudging any fingerprints that might remain on the surface. The living room revealed itself in stages as the door swung wider. Drawers pulled open, contents scattered across the floor. Couch cushions displaced, thrown aside like afterthoughts. Papers from my home office spread across every surface, some crumpled, some torn. The violation hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. This was my sanctuary, the space I had built piece by piece over 4 years. Now it looked like a crime scene, which I supposed it was. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, heart pounding, listening for any sound that might indicate the intruders were still inside. Silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant noise of traffic outside. They were gone. But they had left their message written in chaos across everything I owned. I moved through the apartment carefully, cataloging the damage without touching anything. Kitchen cabinets hung open, containers shifted and examined. The bathroom medicine cabinet had been searched, bottles rearranged. My bedroom was the worst. Closet doors thrown wide, clothes pushed aside, shoeboxes emptied onto the carpet. They had been thorough, methodical, professional. This was not random vandalism or opportunistic theft. They knew what they were looking for. My television still hung on the wall. My laptop sat untouched on the kitchen table. They had not taken electronics or valuables. They had been searching for something specific, and the realization of what that something was made my pulse race even faster. The closet floor, the false panel, the safe. I knelt down, pushing aside scattered clothing, and felt along the baseboard until my fingers found the hidden latch. The panel swung open. The safe sat exactly where I had left it, combination lock untouched, door still sealed. They had not found it. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. They had torn apart my entire apartment, but they had missed the one thing that mattered. I opened the safe with trembling hands and pulled out the hard drive. Still there, still intact. Evidence of my father's crimes, still in my possession. But for how long? They would come back. They would keep looking until they found what they wanted. I needed to move this somewhere safe, somewhere they could not reach. First, though, I needed documentation. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my voice steadier than I expected as I reported a break-in at my address. The dispatcher told me an officer would arrive within 30 minutes and instructed me not to touch anything. I sat on my violated couch and waited, the hard drive clutched against my chest like a lifeline. Officer Daniels arrived 27 minutes later. He was professional, sympathetic, thorough in the way police are when they know they probably will not solve a case, but want to do their jobs correctly anyway. He photographed the damage, dusted for fingerprints, documented everything with careful notes. I could not tell him the full truth. I said I was in a legal dispute with family members, which was technically accurate. I mentioned the conservatorship case without explaining the criminal evidence that made me a target. He nodded, asked follow-up questions, jotted down my vague answers without pressing for details I was not willing to share. "Looks professional," he said finally, surveying the systematic chaos. They knew what they were doing, no forced entry on the building itself, which means they either had a key or tailgated someone through the front door. He handed me a case number and a victim services card. "The security cameras in your lobby might have caught something," he added, but his tone suggested he did not expect much. These people knew how to be invisible. After he left, I sat alone in my ransacked apartment, understanding with perfect clarity that the police could not protect me from this. This was family business. It would be handled within the family, one way or another. I called Diane immediately. She listened to my account of the break-in without interrupting, then issued instructions with the calm authority of someone who had seen this before. "Bring the hard drive to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We have a secure safe." She paused. "Make copies tonight. Multiple copies, different locations. If they find one, the others survive." I spent the next 2 hours following her instructions. One copy uploaded to encrypted cloud storage, the password known only to me. One copy transferred to a USB drive that I hid in a compartment under my car's spare tire. The original would go to Diane's office in the morning. I packed an overnight bag with essentials and booked a hotel room downtown, paying cash under a name that was not quite mine. Paranoid, maybe. But Marcus had warned me, and the scratch marks on my door proved he was right. Nothing was private anymore. Everything I said and did was being watched. I texted Marcus from my encrypted app. They searched my place. Evidence is secure. Escalating. His reply came within minutes. Expected. Stay mobile. We meet tomorrow. I checked into the hotel, double-locked the door, and tried to convince my racing mind to let me sleep. The phone rang at 9:47. I stared at the screen, at the name that appeared there, at the contact I had not spoken to in 4 years. Sloane Cole, my sister. My stomach tightened as I answered, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. Sloane's voice poured through, sweet and concerned and perfectly calibrated. "Marin, oh my God, I just heard what happened. Mom told me about the break-in. Are you okay?" I processed her words slowly, each one landing like a stone in still water. Claudia knew about the break-in. The police report was filed 3 hours ago. Word traveled fast in the Cole network. "I have been so worried about you," Sloane continued, filling my silence with her rehearsed concern. "We all have. I know things have been difficult between us, but family is family, right? I just wanted to make sure you are safe." Every word sounded scripted. Every pause felt calculated. I recognized the performance because I had grown up watching our mother perfect it. Sloane had learned well. "Where are you staying tonight?" she asked, her voice dropping into something that was supposed to sound intimate and sisterly. "I could come over, we could talk, catch up. It has been so long." I kept my responses vague, my tone neutral. "I am fine, just shaken up, staying with a friend." But Sloane was not finished. She kept probing, her questions casual on the surface but pointed underneath. "Do you need anything? Money? A place to stay? I heard you have been seeing a lawyer. Is everything okay with your finances?" And then, slipped in like a knife between ribs, her real purpose revealed. Did they take anything important? Any old files or work stuff? There it was. The question she had been building toward all along. The reason for this sudden concern after 4 years of silence. She was fishing for information. She wanted to know if the evidence was still in my possession, or if the break-in had succeeded. I did not give her the satisfaction. "They took some electronics," I said carefully. "Nothing important." She made sympathetic sounds, but I could hear the frustration beneath them. She had not gotten what she came for. "Well, if you need anything, I am here," she said finally. "We are all here. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Catch up?" "I miss you, Marin. I really do." The line went dead, and I sat in the anonymous hotel room, the phone still warm in my hand. 4 years of silence. And now this. Not because Sloane missed me, not because she cared about my well-being, because our parents had sent her to gather intelligence. The sister I had shared a bedroom with, whispered secrets to, built blanket forts with, was now a weapon aimed at my destruction. I should have felt surprised, but I did not. I should have felt betrayed, but that would require believing she had ever truly been on my side. The Sloane I remembered from childhood was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen inheritance over sisterhood, approval over integrity. She had made her choice 4 years ago when she watched me pack and warned me they would never forgive me. Now she was proving exactly which side she stood on. They had sent my sister to spy on me. They had broken into my home. They had threatened me through lawyers and surveillance and violated sanctuaries. But they had failed to find what they were looking for, and they had failed to frighten me into submission. I opened my laptop and searched a name I had seen in the files. Rosa Delgado, Miguel's widow. Another person silenced by Cole Construction. Another potential witness. I found an address in southeast Portland, a modest neighborhood far from the glass towers where my father made his deals. Tomorrow I would find her. They had sent my sister to spy on me, so I would find the people they had paid to forget. And I would help them remember. The neighborhood changed as we drove deeper into southeast Portland. Trendy coffee shops gave way to auto repair shops, then to small homes with chain-link fences and yards that showed the wear of lives lived paycheck to paycheck. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, quiet, his scarred hands resting on his knees. He knew where we were going. He had been here before, years ago, to attend a funeral for a man who should not have died. Rosa Delgado's house appeared at the end of a quiet street, a small bungalow with peeling paint and a garden that had once been loved but now struggled against neglect. An American flag hung faded on the small porch. This was where $50,000 of silence money ended up. This was the price Cole Construction had paid to bury the truth along with the dead. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts. 5 years Rosa had lived here without her husband. 5 years of grief compounded by a piece of paper that told her she could never speak his name in connection with the truth of how he died. She might not want to talk, Marcus said quietly. The NDA scared her. They threatened to take back the settlement money if she violated it. For someone with nothing, $50,000 is everything and nothing at the same time. I nodded, understanding. She had signed under duress, grieving and alone, pressured by lawyers who knew exactly how to exploit her vulnerability. But she deserved to know there might be another way. We got out of the car and walked to the gate. Marcus limped beside me, his injuries a silent testament to what Cole Construction had done. The doorbell echoed inside the house, and we waited in the light drizzle that had started to fall. A curtain moved in the front window. Someone was watching, deciding whether to answer. Then the door opened slowly, just a few inches, and a woman peered out at us with eyes that held too much sorrow and not enough trust. Rosa Delgado was in her mid-50s, small-framed with gray streaking through black hair that had probably once been vibrant. She wore a worn cardigan and house slippers, rosary beads wrapped around her wrist. Her face showed the particular weariness of someone who had cried too much for too long and now held tears in permanent reserve. When she saw Marcus, recognition flickered in her expression. Marcus Webb. Her voice was soft, accented with years in America, but roots still reaching back to Oaxaca. I remember you from the funeral. Marcus nodded. I remember you too, Rosa. I am sorry I have not come sooner. Her eyes moved to me and the wariness returned. Suspicion hardened her features. Who is she? Marcus glanced at me, and I knew this was my moment to earn trust or lose it entirely. This is Marin Cole, he said. Rosa's face changed immediately. The name hit her like a slap. She stepped back, hand moving to the door as if to slam it shut. Cole? You are one of them? I spoke quickly, before she could disappear behind that door and the walls she had built around her grief. Victor Cole is my father, but I am not here for him. I am here because of what he did. To Miguel, to you, to all of us. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for lies or hidden motives. Then she looked at Marcus. You trust her? He nodded slowly. She has evidence, Rosa. Real evidence. She is fighting them. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of rain dripping from the porch eaves. Finally, Rosa stepped aside. Come in, but I cannot promise anything. The living room was small and immaculately clean, despite the age of the furniture. Plastic covers protected the couch. Religious icons hung on every wall. The Virgin of Guadalupe watched from above the television, surrounded by crucifixes and images of saints. But what drew my attention was the corner dedicated to Miguel, a shrine built from love and loss. His photograph dominated the space, a large framed image of a man in work clothes, hard hat tucked under his arm, broad smile lighting up his face. Candles surrounded the photo, some burned down to stubs, others fresh. Artificial flowers added color that real ones could not sustain. His wedding ring sat in a small glass box, catching the dim light. A laminated newspaper clipping hung beside the frame. Westfield Bridge collapse, 3 workers dead. The edges were worn from touching. Other photographs covered nearby shelves. Miguel and Rosa on their wedding day, 30 years younger, full of hope. 2 children, a daughter in a graduation gown, a son in military uniform. Grandchildren, 3 of them, young faces that would never know their grandfather. A family that continued without its patriarch, shaped forever by his absence. My children do not visit much, Rosa said quietly, following my gaze. Too painful, they say. My daughter blames me for signing the paper. My son says I should have fought. They do not understand. She sat down in a chair facing the shrine, gesturing for us to take the couch. I had nothing to fight with. I took my seat, acutely aware that I was sitting in a space built entirely around grief. Rosa began speaking without prompting, as if she had been waiting years for someone willing to listen. The day of the collapse, I was home making lunch. A phone call from a number I did not recognize. A voice telling me there had been an accident. I drove to the hospital, but Miguel was already gone. They would not let me see him. They said it was better that way. The funeral was paid for by Cole Construction, a generous gesture, everyone said. Then the lawyers came. 3 of them, expensive suits, sitting right where you are now. They offered $50,000, immediate payment. All I had to do was sign an agreement never to discuss the accident publicly. I asked for time. They said it was a one-time offer. Take it or get nothing. Rosa's hands twisted the rosary beads, fingers moving along the familiar pattern. I had no savings. Miguel was our only income. The mortgage was 3 months behind. His mother needed medical care. The lawyer looked at me and said, "This is your only chance. Your husband is already gone. Do you want to spend years in court, fighting a company with unlimited resources?" I signed on day 3. I needed to bury my husband. I needed to feed my family. Every day since, I wake up and hate myself a little more. They bought my silence for the price of a used car. Miguel deserved better. The truth deserved better. But I was scared and alone, and they knew exactly how to use that against me. She rose from her chair and disappeared into the bedroom, returning with a manila folder clutched to her chest. "I signed their paper," she said. "But I kept copies of everything. The NDA, the settlement agreement, the letters they sent. I do not know why. Maybe I hoped someday someone would care." She handed me the folder, and I opened it carefully, scanning documents that confirmed everything she had said. Standard tactics for silencing victims. Legal language designed to intimidate. Payments structured to look like generosity while buying permanent silence. But there was something else, something Rosa had not mentioned. A handwritten note in the margin of her copy of the NDA. She had written a date and a single sentence, the night before he died. I looked up at her, and she nodded, understanding my unspoken question. The night before the collapse, Miguel could not sleep. He sat at this kitchen table until 2 a.m. I asked him what was wrong. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. He said, "Rosa, the steel they are using, it is not right. I told them. I wrote reports. Nobody listens. They care about money, not safety. Something bad is going to happen. I can feel it." "I told him to quit," Rosa continued. "Find another job. He said we needed the insurance, the pension. He said he would try one more time to make them listen. The next morning, he kissed me goodbye and went to work. That was the last time." Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw not just grief, but anger, banked and burning after 5 years of enforced silence. "Your father knew," Miguel told his supervisors, and they told Victor Cole. "He knew the bridge was dangerous, and he let my husband walk onto it anyway. That is not an accident. That is murder with paperwork." The word hung in the air between us. Murder. She was right. There was no other word for what my father had done. I reached across and took Rosa's weathered hands in mine. "I have evidence. Financial records proving the fraud. Marcus can testify about the material substitutions. And now I have your story. What Miguel knew. What they paid to bury. Rosa, I cannot bring Miguel back. I cannot undo 5 years of silence. But I can make them answer for what they did. If you are willing to testify, to break the NDA, I will make sure you are protected." She looked at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, but something else burning in her eyes now, something that looked like fire. "For 5 years, I have lit candles and prayed for justice. Maybe God sent you instead of an angel. Tell me what I need to do." Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood run cold. Victor Cole. I answered, and my father's voice came through the speaker, cold and controlled, exactly as I remembered. Maren. We need to talk about what you are doing. I know you have been meeting with people, asking questions. I know about the engineer. I know about the widow. You think you are building something, but you are digging your own grave. When the court declares you incompetent, everything you own becomes family property. Your bank accounts, your apartment, your little files, everything, Maren, including the things you are trying so hard to hide. I kept my voice steady, matching his ice with my own. Is that a confession, Father? You just admitted you know about the files. You just admitted this is not about my well-being. Thank you for clarifying your motives. His pause was brief but telling. He had said too much, and he knew it. Do not be clever, Maren. You are not equipped for this. The line went dead. I lowered my phone and looked at Marcus and Rosa. He just confirmed everything. This was never about protecting me. It is about silencing me. Rosa straightened in her chair, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. What will you do? I thought of Miguel, Jerome, and David. I thought of the families paid to forget. I thought of the truth buried under legal documents and threats. What he never expected, I said. I will stop being silent. 1 week before the hearing, Diane's conference table disappeared under stacks of documents, folders, and sticky notes in 3 different colors. The Portland skyline glowed orange through the windows as the sun set, but neither of us had noticed the passing hours. We had been working since early morning, building our case piece by piece, preparing for a battle that would determine not just my freedom, but my father's fate. A whiteboard on the wall displayed our timeline, our witness list, our evidence inventory. Boxes of documents lined the walls, 4 years of preparation compressed into 7 days. Diane sat at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on her nose, a pen moving constantly across legal pads. I sat across from her, laptop open, cross-referencing files and preparing summaries. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Every document we organized was another weapon in our arsenal. Every piece of evidence was another brick in the wall we were building around my father's crimes. We have financial records, engineering testimony, and a victim statement, Diane said, reviewing our progress. The hard drive contents have been authenticated by a forensic computer expert. Your employment history, psychological evaluation, and credit reports all demonstrate clear competence. She looked up at me. On paper, their conservatorship case is laughable. But this was never about paper, I replied. She nodded slowly. No, it was not. And that brings us to the decision you need to make. She stood and walked to the whiteboard, drawing 2 paths with quick, decisive strokes. Path A is defense only, she said, pointing to the first line. We prove you are competent, dismiss the petition, and keep the criminal evidence private. You win the conservatorship case and walk away with your life intact. Your father never faces consequences, but you are free. She pointed to the second line. Path B is full exposure. We submit the evidence to the court record, trigger a criminal investigation, and destroy Cole Construction. You win the conservatorship case and your father goes to prison. But everything becomes public. Your family name, your history, your role in bringing them down. There is no walking away quietly. I stared at the 2 paths, understanding the weight of the choice before me. Path A was safer. I could protect myself, maintain my privacy, rebuild my life without the spotlight of a criminal investigation. But it meant letting my father walk free. It meant Miguel, Jerome, and David would remain accidents in the public record, their deaths unrevenged, their families' silence permanent. It meant Rosa would keep her $50,000 and her shame, and Marcus would keep fighting alone. Path B was war. Total, public, irreversible war. If I chose this path, I would destroy my family completely. My father would face prison. My mother would face ruin. My name would appear in headlines, in court documents, in the historical record of corporate crime. There would be no going back to anonymity, no pretending the Cole family was anything other than what we were. But justice would be served. The truth would be told. and the dead would finally have their names spoken by someone other than the people who loved them. I did not survive 4 years of silence to win quietly, I said. Rosa lost her husband. Marcus lost his career and his health. 3 men lost their lives. If I choose safety now, I am no different from everyone else who looked away. Diane nodded, something like approval flickering in her eyes. Then we build a case so airtight they cannot spin their way out. She began outlining our witness strategy. Janet Morrison, my supervisor at the accounting firm, would testify first. 20 years in the field, impeccable reputation, direct knowledge of my professional competence. She would paint a picture of a capable, reliable, exceptional employee, the opposite of the unstable daughter my parents had described. Dr. Patricia Huang, a clinical psychologist from Portland State, would testify next. She had conducted a legitimate evaluation, 8 hours of interviews and standardized testing, and her conclusions directly contradicted the fraudulent assessment my parents had submitted. No emotional instability, she would say. No cognitive impairment. Above-average resilience, clear judgment, appropriate emotional regulation. The polar opposite of everything Gerald Hoyt would claim. Marcus would testify about the material substitutions, the ignored warnings, the cover-up he had witnessed from the inside. His testimony was emotional, and Gerald would try to paint him as a disgruntled former employee, but his scars spoke louder than any cross-examination could dismiss. And Rosa would testify about Miguel's warning, about the pressure to sign the NDA, about 5 years of enforced silence. Diane had already prepared arguments for why her testimony should be admissible despite the non-disclosure agreement. Let them sue a grieving widow, she said. See how that plays in the press. The final piece of our strategy was the asset inventory. Standard procedure in conservatorship cases required a complete list of the respondent's assets. The bailiff would read it into the record, item by item, a routine formality meant to establish what the petitioners were seeking to control. But nothing about our case was routine. Diane read aloud as I typed the list. Savings account, First Portland Credit Union, $43,217. Checking account, same institution, $8,412. 2019 Honda Accord, paid in full. Condominium, Northeast Portland, mortgage satisfied. Each item was a brick in the wall of competence, proof of years of disciplined building. Then she paused. The hard drive. How do we list it? I considered the question carefully. It was personal property, legally mine, but its contents were explosive. List it exactly as it is, I said. External hard drive containing personal and professional documents. Diane smiled, understanding the strategy. When the bailiff reads that in court, Victor will know exactly what it means. And so will the judge, once we explain. We were using their own weapon against them. The conservatorship required an asset inventory. We would give them one, and hidden in the routine list of bank accounts and property would be the bomb that would destroy them. That night, alone in my hotel room, the weight of everything finally crashed down on me. The preparation was finished, the witnesses were ready, the evidence was organized and authenticated. There was nothing left to do but wait, and in the waiting, the fear found room to grow. What if I lost? What if Gerald found a loophole, a technicality, a way to twist the facts? What if the judge looked at a daughter accusing her father of murder and saw only family drama, only bitterness, only a woman too damaged by estrangement to think clearly? What if I destroyed my father and felt nothing but emptiness? What if I destroyed him and felt everything? I did not cry often. I had trained myself out of it during childhood, learning that tears were weakness in my parents' house, ammunition they could use against me. But that night, alone in an anonymous room with the city lights blinking through the window, I let myself break. Sobs shook my body, tears soaking the pillow, 4 years of pressure finding release. It was not weakness, it was survival. Some weights cannot be carried without setting them down occasionally. My phone buzzed. A text from Janet Morrison, my supervisor, my mentor, The woman who had believed in me when I had barely believed in myself. Whatever happens next week, you are not alone. You have already proven who you are. The courtroom is just paperwork. Get some sleep. You have earned it. I read the message 3 times, letting the words sink in. She was right. I had built a career, a home, a life. No judge could take that away. No ruling could erase what I had accomplished. The courtroom was just the final step in a journey that had started 4 years ago when I walked out of my father's house with nothing but a suitcase and a dream of freedom. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I would prepare. Next week, I would fight. Tonight, I would rest. The next evening, I returned to my apartment for the first time since the break-in. New locks had been installed, a security camera mounted above the door. The space still felt violated, but it was mine, and I needed to reclaim it before the hearing. I was reading case notes in my living room when the doorbell rang at 9:47. I checked the security camera feed on my phone and froze. Sloane stood outside my door. Alone, no car visible, face tear-streaked, mascara running. She hugged herself against the cold, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Every instinct told me not to open that door. This was the woman who had called to fish for information, who had asked about my files with fake casual concern, who had chosen our parents over me 4 years ago and every day since. But something was different tonight. The performance was gone. The calculated sweetness, the rehearsed worry, all of it stripped away. What remained looked like genuine collapse. I opened the door but did not step aside. "What do you want, Sloane?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I know I do not deserve to be here. I know what I have done. But I cannot do it anymore, Marin. I cannot keep lying for them." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "There is something you need to know. About the case. About what they are planning. They are going to destroy you in that courtroom. And I know exactly how." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I also know how to stop them." I studied her face, searching for the trap, the angle, the hidden motive. But all I saw was a woman who had finally reached her limit. "Come inside," I said. "Tell me everything." Sloane stepped into my apartment like she was entering a church, hesitant and reverent and uncertain whether she belonged. I closed the door behind her but kept my distance, arms crossed, body positioned between her and the rest of my home. 4 years of silence stood between us like furniture we had to navigate around. She remained in the entryway, dripping slightly from the rain outside, mascara still streaking her cheeks. Neither of us moved toward the kitchen or the couch. This was not a reunion. This was an interrogation. "You have 5 minutes," I said, my voice flat. 5 minutes to explain why I should not throw you out." Sloane flinched but did not argue. "I deserve that. I deserve worse. But please just listen. Then you can decide." I gestured toward the kitchen table, the same table where I had read the conservatorship petition, where my life had fractured and begun reassembling into something stronger. We sat facing each other. No coffee offered, no pretense of hospitality. The USB drive lay between us like a grenade with the pin half pulled. "You think you were the only one trapped in that house?" Sloane began, her voice trembling. "You got out." "I never did." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. The praise, the rewards, the favoritism, you saw it from the outside and thought I had it easy. But they did not love me more, Marin. They owned me more. She described a life I had never considered. Every achievement monitored and directed. Every relationship vetted and approved. College major chosen by Victor before she finished high school. Career path determined before she knew what she wanted. Boyfriends screened for suitable backgrounds and dismissed if they failed to meet standards. "You were the rebel," she said. "I was the investment. And investments do not get to have opinions. They get to perform." Sloane had performed. Marketing manager at Cole Construction, a title that looked impressive but carried an invisible second role. "I report to Dad every week," she admitted. "Not about work, about people." Who is asking questions, who seems unhappy, who might be disloyal. I have helped him destroy careers. People who did nothing wrong except notice things they should not have noticed. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. I told myself I had no choice. But I did. I was just too scared to take it. Then they told me about you, she continued, about the conservatorship. They said you were unstable, dangerous, that you had stolen company property and needed to be protected from yourself. I believed them. At first. But then I started looking at the files myself. What she found had shattered the fragile framework of denial she had built around her life. Coal construction was dying. For 6 months she had noticed anomalies in marketing budgets, funds being redirected, projects cancelled without explanation. She dug carefully, quietly, using skills she had learned from years of operating in our father's shadow without being noticed. The company was hemorrhaging money. Westfield Bridge was not an isolated incident. 3 more projects showed similar cost savings, similar material substitutions, similar structural concerns. Lawsuits were pending, insurance claims denied, contracts canceled by clients who had started asking uncomfortable questions. Dad has been hiding it from everyone, Sloan said. Even Mom did not know until recently. He needs cash. Fast. The banks will not lend because there are too many red flags. Private investors pulled out after their due diligence uncovered problems. Your apartment, your savings. It is not about control. He needs liquid assets to survive the next quarter. And if he gets conservatorship, he gets access to everything you own. But it was not just about money, she explained. It was about silence. He knows you have the Westfield files. If those go public during a financial audit, it is not just bankruptcy, it is prison. The conservatorship is not about taking your money, it is about taking your silence. I absorbed her words, feeling the pieces click into place. My father was desperate, cornered, fighting for survival with the only weapons he knew, control and manipulation. And I was standing in his way. There is more, Sloan said. I sat in on their meeting with Gerald Hoyt last week. They have a strategy for the hearing, and it is brutal. She outlined their plan with the precision of someone who had memorized every word. Phase 1 was character assassination. The psychiatric evaluation Gerald would present had been written based entirely on Claudia's descriptions. The doctor had never met me, never spoken to me, never conducted any actual assessment. He would testify that I showed signs of paranoid delusion, obsessive behavior, detachment from reality. They would use my isolation as proof, my lack of romantic relationships, my small social circle, my estrangement from family. They would say my obsession with old files was evidence of mental instability. Phase 2 was the theft narrative. Gerald would argue that the hard drive contained stolen company property. He would demand the court seize it as evidence of my inability to make sound decisions. If the judge agreed, they would get both the files and the conservatorship. 2 birds, 1 gavel. Phase 3 was the backup plan. If it looks like they are losing, Gerald will file an emergency motion claiming you are an imminent danger to yourself. They have a witness ready to testify that you made suicidal statements. That is perjury, I said, my voice cold. Sloan nodded. They do not care. They are cornered animals. There is no line they will not cross. Who is the witness? She hesitated, and I saw the shame wash across her face before she spoke. Me. They wanted me to say it. That is why I am here. I will not do it. The silence that followed was suffocating. My sister, my own sister, had been prepared to lie under oath, to claim I was suicidal, to help them lock me away and seize everything I had built. The betrayal was so complete it almost circled back to absurdity. You were going to lie, I said slowly. Say I wanted to kill myself, to help them destroy me. Sloane's tears were flowing freely now. I was terrified. Dad said if I did not cooperate, he would cut me off completely. I would lose everything, the job, the house they helped me buy, the inheritance. What? I interrupted. He would disown you, cut you off? Welcome to my life, Sloan. 4 years ago. She broke then, really broke, in a way I had never seen her break before. I know what I am. I have spent 26 years being their puppet. I do not know who I am without their approval." She looked at me with eyes that held no performance, no calculation, only raw and desperate honesty. "But I know who I do not want to be anymore. Someone who destroys her own sister to keep a seat at a table that was never really mine." She reached into her pocket and placed the USB drive on the table between us. "This is everything." Emails between Dad and Gerald. The financial records showing the company collapse, the witness list, their whole strategy. I copied it last night. They do not know. I stared at the small device, understanding what it represented. This was not just evidence. This was Sloane burning every bridge she had, choosing exile over complicity. I took the drive and inserted it into my laptop. Files populated the screen, emails, PDFs, scanned documents. It was all there, exactly as she described. The psychiatric evaluation based on Claudia's descriptions, the emergency motion draft ready to file, the list of witnesses prepared to lie. "If you are lying to me," I said slowly, still scrolling through files, "I will destroy you along with them." Sloane nodded. "I am not lying. Then prove it. Testify. In court. Against Mom and Dad. Tell the judge exactly what you told me tonight." Her face went pale. "They will never forgive me. I will lose everything. The job, the house, the inheritance. I will have nothing." I closed the laptop and met her eyes. "You will have something they can never give you. You will have yourself." I left 4 years ago with a suitcase and a dream of being free. It was the hardest thing I ever did. And the best. You are stronger than you think, Sloane. You just never had to find out. The silence stretched between us. But it was different now. Not the silence of strangers or enemies, but the silence of two people standing at a crossroads, deciding which path to take together. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I cannot promise it will not hurt, but I can promise you will not be alone." Sloane broke again, but this time I held on. We sat in my kitchen, the kitchen of the apartment I had built from nothing, and let 4 years of walls crumble between us. The sister I thought I had lost was still there, buried under layers of fear and performance, waiting for permission to emerge. We talked until 2 a.m, filling in the gaps of our separate lives, untangling the web of manipulation our parents had woven around us both. Sloane could not go home. Our parents would know immediately that something had changed, that their carefully controlled daughter had slipped her leash. She would stay at a safe location Diane could arrange until the hearing. Tomorrow she would give a formal witness statement. The day after she would prepare with our legal team. 1 week. Then we would face them together. I walked Sloane to the spare bedroom, the room I had never had a guest to fill. At the door she turned back. "I am sorry. For everything." I looked at my sister, at the woman who had been as much a victim of our parents as I had, just in different ways. "Do not be sorry," I said. "Be ready. Because when that bailiff reads my asset list, Dad is going to realize he lost both his daughters. And that is when the real collapse begins." The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold. Portland wrapped in the kind of low clouds that made everything feel compressed and urgent. I woke at 5, though sleep had been a stranger most of the night. My professional outfit hung on the closet door where I had placed it the evening before. Navy blazer, white blouse, simple pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother on my mother's side, a woman I barely remembered but who had never been part of the coal machinery. The clothes were armor disguised as respectability. I dressed carefully, checked my reflection 3 times, and still felt unprepared for what was coming. Diane picked me up at 7:30. Sloane was already in the back seat, pale but composed, wearing a simple gray dress that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her 26 years. We drove through morning traffic in silence, each of us carrying our own weight into battle. There was nothing left to say. Everything had been planned, prepared, rehearsed. Now we just had to execute. The Multnomah County Courthouse rose before us like a monument to the idea that justice could be contained in stone and procedure. Gray columns, American flags, imposing steps that countless people had climbed with hope or dread, or some mixture of both. I had driven past this building hundreds of times without really seeing it. Now it looked different, charged with significance, the place where my future would be decided by a stranger in black robes. We parked in the garage beneath the building, our footsteps echoing off concrete walls as we walked toward the elevator. Sloane stayed close to me, drawing strength from proximity, or perhaps giving it. I could not tell anymore where her courage ended and mine began. Diane led us through security, past metal detectors and board guards, into an elevator that carried us to the third floor. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with wooden doors, and the quiet murmur of lives being reshaped by legal proceedings. Room 317, Family Court Division. The door that would decide everything. My parents were already there, seated on a bench outside the courtroom with Gerald Hoyt between them. Victor wore a charcoal suit with a silver tie, power colors chosen to remind everyone in the room of his status and authority. His posture was confident, his expression controlled, a man who had walked into countless negotiations expecting to win. Claudia sat beside him in a cream-colored dress, pearls at her throat, the picture of maternal elegance. Her eyes were already slightly red, preparation for the performance she would give on the witness stand. Gerald shuffled papers with the satisfied air of a lawyer who believed his victory was inevitable. They looked up as we approached, and I watched the recognition register across their faces in slow motion. Victor's eyes found me first, his prepared sneer already forming. Then his gaze moved past me to the figure at my back, and everything changed. The color drained from his face. The confident posture cracked. For one perfect moment I saw my father completely unprepared, stripped of his armor by the simple presence of his younger daughter standing beside me instead of behind him. "Sloane, what are you doing here?" His voice was low, dangerous, but I heard the tremor beneath the authority. Claudia clutched his arm, her performance forgotten in genuine confusion. "Sweetheart, why are you with her?" Sloane did not flinch. She met our father's eyes with a steadiness I had never seen in her before. "I am here to tell the truth, Dad. Something this family has avoided for too long." She walked past them into the courtroom without another word. I followed, allowing myself one moment of satisfaction at the expression on Victor's face. The first shot had been fired, and it had landed exactly where I intended. Behind me I heard urgent whispered conference between Victor and Gerald. The confident strategy they had built was already crumbling, and the hearing had not even begun. Courtroom 317 was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights giving it the institutional feel of a place where difficult decisions were made daily. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, American flag to the right, state flag to the left. 2 tables faced the bench, petitioner's table on the left, respondent's table on the right. I took my seat beside Diane, Sloane settling into the gallery directly behind me. In the back rows, I spotted Marcus and Rosa, quiet presences offering solidarity. Janet Morrison sat near the door, ready to be called when needed. These were my people, my witnesses, my army of truth-tellers assembled against the machinery of my father's lies. The clock on the wall read 9:12. 18 minutes until the hearing began. I folded my hands on the table and focused on my breathing, letting each exhale carry away a layer of tension. Victor and Claudia entered with Gerald, taking their positions at the petitioner's table. My father did not look at me. He was too busy regaining his composure, rebuilding the mask that Sloane's defection had cracked. I could feel his fury radiating across the aisle, but I did not turn to meet it. He was not worth my attention anymore. "All rise," the bailiff announced at exactly 9:30. The Honorable Judge Margaret Harrison presiding. We stood as a side door opened and the judge entered. She was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on a face that suggested she had heard every lie the legal system could produce and had stopped being impressed long ago. Her reputation preceded her: thorough analysis, no tolerance for theatrics, a commitment to truth that had made her both respected and feared. She took her seat and surveyed the room with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything. "Be seated," she said. "We will begin." The petition was straightforward in its cruelty. Gerald Hoyt rose with the practiced grace of a man who had delivered thousands of arguments, his expensive suit and confident gestures projecting success and credibility. "Your Honor, we are here today out of deep concern for Marin Elizabeth Cole." He painted a picture of a troubled young woman, emotionally unstable, professionally stagnant, isolated from her loving family for reasons no one could understand. She has made questionable financial decisions, obsessed over irrelevant documents, withdrawn from healthy relationships. Her behavior patterns suggest an individual unable to properly manage her own affairs. The exhibits came next, each one a weapon forged from half-truths and fabrications. The psychiatric evaluation, written by a doctor who had never met me, concluded I showed signs of paranoid delusion and obsessive fixation. The financial analysis, conveniently ignoring my paid-off apartment and substantial savings, suggested poor judgment. Witness statements from former neighbors described me as withdrawn and strange, cherry-picked observations stripped of context. Gerald requested full conservatorship, his voice heavy with false concern. This will allow the petitioners to protect their daughter from her own harmful decisions, to manage her finances responsibly, to ensure she receives the care and guidance she clearly needs. I sat motionless, hands folded, face neutral. Inside, fire burned behind a wall of ice. Diane's hand touched my arm briefly. "Steady, wait." Victor took the stand next, transforming before my eyes from boardroom predator to grieving father. He slouched slightly, furrowed his brow, produced heavy sighs at appropriate moments. "We were close once," he said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "She was a bright child, full of promise. Then something changed. She became secretive, distant. She rejected every opportunity we tried to give her. We watched her spiral, helpless to intervene." He described my departure as a breakdown, claimed I had stolen company property, alleged erratic behavior and concerning statements that had never occurred. "She accused us of terrible things," he said, shaking his head sorrowfully. "Things that had no basis in reality. We tried to get her help. She refused." The emotional peak arrived precisely on cue. His voice cracked, his eyes glistened with manufactured tears. "I am not here as a CEO or a businessman," he declared. "I am here as a father who is terrified for his daughter, who has watched her refuse help for 4 years, who cannot stand by anymore while she destroys herself." He dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, and I watched the man who had ordered materials substituted on a bridge, who had buried the truth about 3 deaths, who had sent people to ransack my apartment, play the victim with flawless precision. Claudia followed, her performance equally polished. "My baby girl," she whispered, tears already flowing. "I do not know where we went wrong. We gave her everything, the best schools, every opportunity. She threw it all away." She described my interest in documentation as obsessive, my independence as isolation, my competence as delusion. "I lie awake every night wondering if she is okay," she concluded, her voice breaking. "Wondering if today is the day we get a terrible phone call." Even the judge's expression softened slightly at the display, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Claudia was good at this. A lifetime of practice had made her dangerous. Gerald rested his case with visible satisfaction. He glanced at me, expecting defeat, expecting the broken woman his evidence had portrayed. Judge Harrison turned to our table. "Ms. Mercer, you may present the respondent's case." Diane rose slowly, deliberately, buttoning her blazer with movements that commanded attention. She walked to the center of the room and let the silence stretch until everyone was watching her. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and clear. "I appreciate counsel's theatrical presentation. However, I am going to present something this courtroom has not seen yet. Evidence, real evidence, not psychiatric evaluations written by doctors who have never met my client. Not financial analyses that conveniently ignore 4 years of demonstrated competence. Not tearful performances from parents whose concern emerged only when my client became inconvenient." Victor's composed mask flickered. Gerald leaned over, whispering urgently. Something was wrong. This was not going according to their plan. Diane turned to the judge with quiet confidence. "I would like to call my first witness. Janet Morrison, Ms. Cole's supervisor and professional mentor. She will explain exactly how incompetent my client really is." Janet rose from the gallery and walked toward the witness stand, and I felt the tide begin to turn. Janet Morrison took the witness stand with the calm authority of someone who had spent 20 years navigating complex financial systems and was not easily impressed by courtroom drama. She wore a gray suit, minimal jewelry, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her presence radiated credibility, the kind that came from expertise earned through decades of meticulous work. Diane approached with measured steps, letting the contrast between Janet's professionalism and the emotional performances we had just witnessed settle into the room. "Ms. Morrison, what is your role at Whitmore and Associates?" "Senior partner," Janet replied. "I oversee our forensic accounting division. And how long have you supervised Maren Cole?" 3.5 years. Can you describe her work performance?" Janet turned slightly to look at me, and I saw warmth in her eyes despite the formal setting. "Maren Cole is one of the most capable accountants I have ever mentored. She is meticulous, analytical, and exceptionally reliable. In 3 years, she has never missed a deadline, never made a significant error. She has been promoted twice. I recommended her for senior associate last month, and the partners approved unanimously." Diane let the words settle before continuing. "How would you characterize her judgment and decision-making abilities?" Janet's response was immediate and firm. "Maren does not just do her job, she excels at it. She catches fraud that other accountants miss. She is trusted with our most sensitive cases. The idea that she cannot manage her own affairs is, frankly, absurd." The words hung in the courtroom air like a verdict delivered before the official ruling. I watched Gerald shift uncomfortably in his seat, his confident posture beginning to erode. Victor's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composed mask. The narrative they had constructed was encountering resistance it had not anticipated. Diane thanked Janet and called our next witness. "Dr. Patricia Huang, please take the stand." Dr. Huang was a clinical psychologist from Portland State, 15 years of experience, published researcher, the kind of expert whose credentials could not be easily dismissed. She had actually met me, spent 8 hours conducting interviews and standardized tests, done the work that the petitioner's expert had skipped entirely. "Dr. Huang," Diane began, "you conducted a psychological evaluation of Ms. Cole?" "Yes, over 3 sessions totaling 8 hours. What were your findings?" Dr. Huang opened her notes, though she barely glanced at them. Her conclusions were clearly memorized, the product of thorough professional work. "Ms. Cole shows no signs of emotional instability, no cognitive impairment, no personality disorders. Her scores indicate above-average intelligence, strong executive function. She demonstrates healthy coping mechanisms, clear judgment, appropriate emotional regulation. In fact, her resilience scores are remarkable given her family history." Diane nodded. "You reviewed the evaluation submitted by petitioners?" "I did." Dr. Huang's tone shifted, becoming sharper. "And what did you observe about that evaluation?" "That evaluation was written without ever meeting the subject. It is based entirely on second-hand accounts from family members." She paused, letting her next words land with full weight. "That is not a psychological evaluation. That is character assassination dressed in medical terminology." "Objection," Gerald said, rising. "Speculation." Judge Harrison did not hesitate. "Overruled. The witness is qualified to assess methodology." I watched Gerald sink back into his chair, and something shifted in the room. The first visible crack in the petitioner's case. Dr. Huang concluded with words that dismantled everything my parents had tried to build. In my professional opinion, there is no psychological basis for conservatorship. Ms. Cole is fully capable of managing her own affairs. The real question is why her parents are so determined to prove otherwise. Diane moved to the evidence phase, presenting exhibits 1 through 12 in rapid succession. Bank statements showing consistent savings and responsible spending. A credit report with a score of 782 and 0 delinquencies. Tax returns filed on time for 4 consecutive years. Mortgage documents proving I had purchased an apartment and paid off the loan early. Vehicle title showing I owned my car outright. Investment accounts demonstrating a modest but growing retirement fund. Employment records documenting promotions, raises, and positive performance reviews. Letters of recommendation from colleagues, supervisors, and clients who trusted me with their most sensitive financial matters. "Your Honor," Diane said, gesturing to the stack of documents before the judge, "this is what financial competence looks like. Not inherited wealth, not family connections, self-made stability, built over 4 years of independent living. The petitioners claim Ms. Cole cannot manage money. The evidence proves she manages it better than most." Judge Harrison reviewed the documents carefully, her expression unreadable but her attention absolute. The numbers did not lie. They could not be spun or reinterpreted or dismissed as emotional testimony. They were facts, cold and clear and devastating to the case against me. Diane pivoted, and I felt the energy in the room shift. We had established my competence. Now it was time to establish their motive. "Your Honor, we have demonstrated Ms. Cole's capability. Now I would like to address the question this court should be asking. Why are the petitioners really here?" "Objection," Gerald said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Relevance." Diane responded without hesitation. "Your Honor, motive is central to evaluating the petition's legitimacy." Judge Harrison considered for a moment. "I will allow it. Proceed." Diane turned to face the gallery, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Why would loving parents file a conservatorship against a competent adult? Why now, after 4 years of estrangement? Why hire expensive lawyers for a daughter they claim to be worried about? Why not simply reach out, attempt reconciliation, have a conversation? I submit that this petition has nothing to do with Ms. Cole's well-being. It has everything to do with what Ms. Cole possesses, something the petitioners desperately want to control, something they cannot obtain any other way. Victor leaned forward and whispered urgently to Gerald. I could see the panic beginning to spread behind his controlled expression. He knew where this was going. He knew what was coming. "To demonstrate," Diane continued, "I would like to request a complete reading of the respondent's asset inventory. Standard procedure in conservatorship cases, but in this case, particularly illuminating." Judge Harrison nodded. "Bailiff, please read the respondent's asset inventory into the record." The bailiff stepped forward, a middle-aged man in formal uniform with a neutral expression and no stake in the outcome. He took the folder from the clerk and opened it, clearing his throat. Victor stood suddenly, his control finally cracking. "Your Honor, is this necessary? The inventory is just routine documentation." Judge Harrison's voice cut through his interruption like a blade. "Sit down, Mr. Cole. You are not counsel. And yes, it is necessary. Bailiff, proceed." The bailiff began reading, his voice flat and official. Asset inventory for Marin Elizabeth Cole. Item 1. Savings account, First Portland Credit Union. Balance, $43,217. Normal. Expected. Gerald relaxed slightly, perhaps thinking the worst was over. Item 2. Checking account, First Portland Credit Union. Balance, $8,412. Still normal. Victor's breathing steadied. The bailiff turned the page. I saw him frown slightly, reading ahead, his expression shifting from neutral to uncertain. He looked up at the judge, then back at the document. Item 3. His voice had changed, carrying a note of hesitation now. External hard drive, Western Digital, 2 terabytes. Contents, financial records, internal communications, and project documentation. Source, Cole Construction, dated 2019 through 2021. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes or explosions. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, watching my father's face transform. The color drained from his skin. His eyes went wide with recognition and fear. Gerald froze, his confident expression collapsing into confusion. "That is stolen property," Victor shouted, bolting upright from his chair. He pointed at me, his finger trembling with rage. "She stole confidential company documents. This is a setup. Your Honor, she is trying to—" Gerald grabbed his arm. "Victor, stop talking, now!" But Victor was beyond counsel, beyond strategy, beyond the careful control that had defined his entire life. 30 years of power were crumbling around him, and he could not accept it. "I built that company from nothing. I will not let her destroy it with lies." Judge Harrison's gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack. "Mr. Cole, you will be silent or you will be removed. This is a courtroom, not a boardroom." Victor forced himself back into his chair, but he was trembling now, his mask completely shattered. Claudia had gone pale beside him, clutching her pearls like a lifeline. Judge Harrison removed her reading glasses and leaned forward. "Ms. Mercer, explain the significance of this item." Diane stepped forward, her voice measured and clear. "Your Honor, that hard drive contains evidence. Evidence of financial fraud committed by Cole Construction. Evidence of material substitutions on the Westfield Bridge project. Evidence that directly connects to the deaths of 3 construction workers 5 years ago." The gallery stirred with murmurs. I heard Rosa's quiet sob from the back of the room, Marcus's voice murmuring comfort. The dead were finally about to have their voice. Judge Harrison's expression transformed. She was no longer hearing a conservatorship case. She was staring at something much larger, much darker, much more consequential. "Ms. Mercer, are you telling me this proceeding involves potential criminal evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." Diane's voice carried the weight of 4 years of silence finally breaking. "And I believe the petitioners filed this conservatorship specifically to seize and destroy it." The judge's eyes moved slowly to my father, and I watched her see him differently now. Not as a concerned parent, not as a pillar of the community, but as a man who had used the legal system to cover his crimes. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice cold and heavy with authority, "I think you have some explaining to do. Everyone will remain seated." Judge Harrison's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade forged from ice. "Bailiff, secure the doors. No one leaves this courtroom." The bailiff moved immediately, positioning himself at the main entrance while a second officer took position near the side door. The click of locks engaging echoed through the sudden silence. This was no longer a conservatorship hearing. The atmosphere had transformed completely, charged with the electricity of something much larger unfolding. Victor sat rigid in his chair, Gerald whispering urgently in his ear, but my father's eyes were fixed on me with a hatred so pure it felt almost physical. I met his gaze without flinching. I had waited 4 years for this moment. I could wait a few more minutes. Judge Harrison turned to Diane, her expression sharp and focused. "Ms. Mercer, I want to understand exactly what we are dealing with. You are alleging this hard drive contains evidence of criminal activity?" "Yes, Your Honor," Diane replied. "Financial fraud, material substitutions on a public infrastructure project, and evidence connecting those substitutions to structural failure. A structural failure that killed 3 men." The weight of those words settled over the courtroom like a funeral shroud. Judge Harrison removed her reading glasses and set them down with deliberate care. She looked at my father with new eyes, seeing not a concerned parent but a potential criminal who had tried to manipulate her court. "Mr. Cole, I strongly advise you to remain silent until you have criminal counsel present." But Victor could not remain silent. Control was his oxygen, and he was suffocating. "This is outrageous," he erupted, rising from his chair. "That drive was stolen from my company. My daughter broke into our offices and copied proprietary information. She is the criminal here, not me." Gerald grabbed his arm, desperation plain on his face. "Victor, stop talking, now." But 30 years of power had made my father incapable of accepting that his words could be used against him. He had never faced consequences. He could not imagine they applied to him. "I built that company from nothing," he continued, his voice rising. "I will not let her destroy it with lies." Judge Harrison's warning came sharp and cold. "Mr. Cole, I warned you to remain silent. Every word you say is being recorded. If you cannot control yourself, I will have you restrained." For a moment, I thought he might listen. Then he pointed at me, his finger trembling with rage, and sealed his own fate. "She does not understand business. She never did. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, cut costs, adjust materials. It is how the real world works." The silence that followed was devastating, absolute. My father had just admitted to material substitution in open court. Gerald's head dropped into his hands, 20 years of corporate law watching a client confess to the very crimes he was being accused of covering up. "Your Honor," Gerald managed, his voice hollow, "I need a moment to confer with my client." Judge Harrison's response was immediate. "Too late for that, counselor." Diane seized the moment with the precision of a surgeon. "Your Honor, since Mr. Cole has opened this door, I would like to present the complete picture. The hard drive contains internal emails, financial records, and engineering memos, all authenticated by a forensic computer expert." She walked the judge through the evidence with methodical clarity. Cole Construction was contracted for the Westfield Bridge renovation in 2019. Contract specified grade 60 rebar and premium concrete mix. Internal records show grade 40 rebar was substituted, standard concrete used. The cost difference, $847,000, was pocketed. But the bridge was not built to handle the loads it was designed for. When the bridge section collapsed, killing 3 workers, Cole Construction controlled the investigation. The investigating firm was a regular contractor for Mr. Cole. Families were pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements for $50,000 each. The deaths were ruled unforeseen material fatigue. The real cause, criminal negligence, was buried. Diane paused, letting the magnitude of what she was describing fill the room. Then she spoke the names that had haunted me for 4 years. Miguel Delgado, 43 years old, husband, father of 2, Jerome Patterson. 38, supported his elderly mother. David Chen, 29, was engaged to be married. From the back of the courtroom, I heard Rosa's quiet sob. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, both of them finally seen, finally heard. The dead were no longer statistics or settlements. They were men with names, with families, with futures that had been stolen. Judge Harrison had heard enough. I have heard enough. This court is not equipped to adjudicate criminal matters. But I am obligated to preserve evidence and report suspected crimes. She picked up the phone on her bench and dialed an internal number. "This is Judge Harrison, courtroom 317. I need courthouse security and a representative from the district attorney's office. Immediately. We have a potential criminal matter requiring detention and evidence preservation." Victor finally understood. This was real. This was happening. His eyes darted to the main door, blocked by the bailiff. To the side door, blocked by another officer. To Claudia, frozen and useless beside him. To Sloane, sitting in the gallery behind me, refusing to meet his gaze. And finally to me, standing calm and still, watching his empire collapse around him. Something broke in him then. 30 years of control, of calculated moves, of never facing consequences, all of it shattered in a single moment of animal panic. He bolted from his chair and ran for the side door, pure instinct overriding any remaining rational thought. The bailiff intercepted him before he made it 3 steps, tackling him against the wall with practiced efficiency. "Get off me." Victor's voice had lost all authority, all composure. "Do you know who I am?" The second bailiff assisted, and together they forced my father to the floor. I watched as handcuffs were produced and applied, silver metal clicking around wrists that had signed death warrants disguised as cost savings. "Victor Cole," the bailiff announced, his voice flat and procedural. "You are being detained pending investigation." The image burned itself into my memory. The CEO of Cole Construction, face pressed into courthouse carpet, designer suit wrinkled and disheveled, silver hair scattered across the floor. The man who had controlled everything, controlled by 2 bailiffs and a pair of handcuffs. I had expected to feel triumph. I felt something much more complicated. Relief and grief and emptiness all tangled together. This was my father. This was the monster who had tried to steal my freedom. Both things were true, and neither canceled the other out. Judge Harrison restored order with practiced authority, directing officers to seat Victor in a corner under guard, while a representative from the district attorney's office arrived. Evidence was officially logged. Chain of custody established. The legal machinery that would grind my father to dust was beginning to turn. Then she turned her attention back to the original matter, regarding the petition for conservatorship filed by Victor and Claudia Cole. Based on the evidence presented today, I find no basis whatsoever for this petition. The respondent, Marin Cole, has demonstrated clear financial competence, professional excellence, psychological stability. The petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter for investigation of potential filing abuse. The petitioners appear to have weaponized conservatorship proceedings for personal gain. This court does not tolerate such manipulation of legal protections. Mr. and Mrs. Cole will bear all court costs and respondents' legal fees. The words washed over me like warm water. Dismissed with prejudice. They could never file again. 4 years of fear, 4 weeks of battle, 4 days of testimony, all resolved in one sentence. I was free. Legally, officially, permanently free. Claudia had sat frozen throughout Victor's arrest, her performance forgotten in the face of genuine catastrophe. Now, as reality penetrated her shock, she began to shake. The perfect composure cracked like dropped porcelain. "This cannot be happening," she whispered, her voice rising toward hysteria. "This cannot be happening." Her makeup smeared as tears flowed freely. She looked at Victor in handcuffs and saw her future dissolving. The house, the country club, the charity galas, the carefully constructed life she had built on foundations of silence and complicity. All of it crumbling. She turned to me, and her grief transformed into rage. "You did this," she screamed. "You destroyed our family. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? You ungrateful, selfish..." Sloane rose from the gallery and positioned herself between Claudia and me, a physical barrier declaring her allegiance. "No, Mother, you destroyed this family. Marin just refused to help you hide it anymore." Claudia stared at both her daughters, the betrayal complete, and collapsed into her chair, sobbing. From the back of the courtroom, a quiet voice cut through the chaos. "Your Honor?" Everyone turned. Rosa Delgado stood in the gallery, small and dignified in her simple dress, rosary beads wrapped around her wrist. The room fell silent. "Yes, ma'am," Judge Harrison's voice had softened. "My name is Rosa Delgado. My husband Miguel was one of the workers who died. I signed a paper 5 years ago saying I would never speak about it. But I am speaking now." She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They told me it was an accident. They gave me money to be quiet. But my husband knew. He told me the night before. The steal was not right. He died because someone wanted to save money. And I have been silent for 5 years because I was scared and alone." She looked directly at Victor, slumped in his corner with officers on either side. "I am not scared anymore. Judge Harrison's response was gentle but official. "Mrs. Delgado, thank you for your courage. Your statement will be included in the record. And I will personally ensure the district attorney's office hears your husband's name." Rosa nodded, tears streaming but standing tall. Marcus helped her back to her seat, and I saw something I had never expected to see. Two people who had been erased, finally visible. Two voices that had been silenced, finally heard. The dead were being spoken for at last. Court officers led Victor away for processing, his expensive suit wrinkled, his authority stripped, his future measured in years behind bars. Claudia was escorted out separately, no charges filed yet but investigation pending. Gerald packed his briefcase with the mechanical movements of a man watching his career implode. The gallery dispersed slowly, whispered conversations filling the space where testimony had echoed. Sloane found me at the respondents' table, her hand slipping into mine. No words were necessary. Contact said everything. Our father was in custody, our mother faced ruin, our family name would become a headline, but we had each other, found in the wreckage of everything we had been told family should be. Diane approached, her expression mixing satisfaction with warning. "It is over, the conservatorship at least. And the criminal case? Just beginning. This will take months, maybe years. Are you ready for that?" I looked at Sloane beside me, at Marcus and Rosa in the gallery, at the empty petitioner's table where my parents had sat with such confidence hours ago. I have been ready for 4 years. Now I am not alone. 6 months later, the newspaper headline read like an epitaph for everything my father had built. Cole Construction CEO sentenced to 8 years. I sat at my kitchen table on an October morning, coffee cooling in my hands, sunlight streaming through windows that no longer felt like walls of a fortress. The article was not front-page news anymore. The scandal had moved from sensation to conclusion, another cautionary tale filed away in the public record. I folded the paper and set it aside, feeling something I had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement that the storm had passed and I was still standing. The apartment around me felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had been holding its breath for 4 years and could finally exhale. Plants thrived on every windowsill. Curtains I had kept closed for security now stood open to the morning. Life had returned to a space that fear had hollowed out. The trial had lasted 6 weeks. Federal prosecutors took over after my evidence went public, building a case that stretched far beyond Westfield Bridge. Fraud, conspiracy, involuntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice. My father's defense team tried everything. Business decisions made under pressure. Industry standard practices misunderstood by outsiders. A vindictive daughter with an axe to grind. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. I attended the sentencing, needing to see the end with my own eyes. Victor stood in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, listening as the judge pronounced 8 years in federal prison with no parole eligibility for 5. Additional civil liability totaled $14 million, assets seized and liquidated for restitution to the families he had silenced. He looked at me once as the marshals led him away. I expected rage or hatred or some final attempt at intimidation. Instead, I saw emptiness. The man who had controlled everything was controlled now by a system he thought he owned. I walked out of that courthouse, feeling not the satisfaction I had imagined, but a hollow relief, like setting down a weight I had carried so long I had forgotten it was not part of my body. Cole Construction collapsed within weeks of the arrest. The audit revealed decades of fraud across multiple projects, corners cut and costs pocketed while structural integrity suffered. 3 more bridges were flagged for emergency inspection. 2 buildings were evacuated pending review. The cost savings my father had celebrated were time bombs he had planted throughout the region, catastrophes waiting to happen. 800 workers lost their jobs, though the skilled ones found positions elsewhere quickly enough. Raymond Husk, the CFO who had kept the paper clean, plea-bargained his way to 3 years in exchange for full cooperation. The Cole name became a synonym for corporate greed. Case studies written, documentaries planned, a legacy transformed from pillar of the community to warning for business schools. I still carried that name, but it meant something different now. Not a burden of association, but a reminder of what happens when power operates without accountability. Rosa Delgado received $2.3 million from the civil settlement. I visited her last month at her new house, a small place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but owned free and clear. Her garden was blooming, grandchildren playing in the yard, life continuing in a space that no longer felt defined by grief. Miguel's shrine remained in the corner of her living room, but it was surrounded now by evidence of ongoing life rather than frozen loss. She took my hands when I arrived and held them for a long moment without speaking. "You gave us more than money," she finally said. "You gave us truth. You gave Miguel his name back. He is not accident victim anymore. He is a man who tried to do right. That is worth more than any settlement." Marcus Webb used his share of the compensation to fund the physical therapy he had been denied for years. He walks without a brace now, though a slight limp remains, a badge of survival he wears without shame. He started a nonprofit focused on construction worker safety, testifying before Congress about industry oversight failures. The man they tried to erase became impossible to ignore, his voice carrying weight precisely because they had tried so hard to silence it. My own life rebuilt itself in ways I had not anticipated. Senior associate at Whitmore and Associates, the youngest in firm history, specializing in the corporate fraud investigations that had become my unexpected expertise. The irony was not lost on me or on Janet, who joked about it regularly during our lunch meetings. Portland Business Journal ran a feature calling me the whistleblower who brought down an empire. I declined most interview requests, letting the evidence speak for itself, but accepted one podcast invitation to discuss financial abuse and family dynamics. Hundreds of messages arrived afterward. Strangers sharing their own stories of manipulation and control, people who had recognized something of their experience in mine. I read every one. Each message was proof that speaking truth created space for others to do the same. Sloane took longer to rebuild. She lost everything that had defined her identity, the job, the house our parents helped her buy, the inheritance she had spent her life earning through compliance. The first months were brutal. Identity crisis, depression, therapy that forced her to confront who she had been and who she wanted to become. But she survived and discovered strength she had never been allowed to develop. She works as an independent marketing consultant now, living in a modest apartment not far from Rosa's neighborhood. She is dating someone our parents would have rejected, a carpenter with kind eyes and calloused hands and no interest in Cole family politics. We meet for coffee every other Saturday. Conversations still sometimes awkward as we navigate the unfamiliar territory of honest sisterhood. "We are not the family we were born into," she told me last week. "We are the family we are choosing to become." 3 weeks ago, on a Sunday afternoon when I was reading peacefully in my living room, the doorbell rang. The security camera showed someone I had not expected. Claudia Cole, aged 10 years and 6 months, standing on my doorstep in simple clothes I had never seen her wear. No designer labels, no pearls, just a woman diminished by circumstances she had spent a lifetime enabling. I let her in, not sure why, instinct perhaps, or curiosity about what remained of my mother beneath the performance. She stood in my living room, the space she had never visited during the years I built it, and looked around with eyes that seemed to be searching for something she could not name. "I am not here to apologize," she said. "I do not know how. I am here because I do not know who I am anymore. Victor made the decisions. I made them look acceptable. I do not know which is worse." We talked for 20 minutes, though talked might be too strong a word. She spoke in fragments, half-formed thoughts about the life she had lived and the wreckage it had produced. There was no tearful reconciliation, no moment of breakthrough or forgiveness. Just a woman facing the consequences of choices she had spent decades refusing to examine. She left without asking to return, without requesting absolution, just a figure walking away into an afternoon that held no place for her anymore. I watched her go and felt something unexpected. Not anger, not pity, just distance. The healthy kind. Last Saturday, I drove out of the city with the windows down and no destination in mind. The October air smelled of fallen leaves and coming rain, the particular scent of northwest autumn that always made me feel alive. I ended up at a lookout point above the Willamette Valley, a place I had discovered during the hardest weeks of preparation and had returned to whenever I needed perspective. I parked and got out, leaning against the hood of my car, watching the city spread below me. 4 years ago, I left my father's house with a suitcase and a hard drive and a desperate hope that I could build something of my own. Now I stood here with a career, a home, a sister, a future. I had not just survived. I had built something they could never take away. People ask me if I feel vindicated, if watching my father go to prison brought the satisfaction I had imagined during all those years of silence. The answer is complicated. Revenge implies I did this to hurt them. I did not. I did this because the truth deserved to exist. Because Miguel and Jerome and David deserved to have their names spoken in courtrooms instead of whispered in settlements. Because Rosa deserved to stop hiding. Because Marcus deserved to be heard. Because I deserved to stop running from the family that was supposed to protect me. Victory is not watching your enemies fall. Victory is standing in the sunlight after the storm passes. It is building a life they said you could not have. It is knowing your worth was never determined by people who refused to see you clearly. If you are watching this, maybe you know what it feels like. To be dismissed, underestimated, told you are not capable of managing your own life. Maybe it is family, maybe it is a workplace. Maybe it is a relationship where someone decided they knew your value better than you did. Here is what I learned. Your worth is not determined by people who underestimate you. Your strength is not measured by the battles they force you to fight. It is measured by the peace you build when you finally win your freedom. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not revenge at all. It is a life lived well, quietly, on your own unshakable terms. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, I would love to hear about it. Drop a comment below, tell me where you are watching from, share your own experience. Your story matters. Someone out there needs to hear it. If you found strength in this, hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own power. And if you want to stay connected with stories like this, hit subscribe. We are building a community of people who refuse to let others define their worth. And together, we are stronger. Thank you for watching. Remember, the most important list is not the one a bailiff reads in a courtroom. It is the one you write for yourself. The list of everything you are and everything you are capable of becoming. Go write it. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.